Welcome to another edition of the Eye on Life podcast. I am your host, Brian Boyer, and I am here today, and I'm going to say this correctly, Valerie Georgantis. I asked before the show to make sure, and I guess Valerie Georgantis, you said that a lot of people have butchered your name. What else? It's Georgantis. So what else? It's a challenging name, but I also kind of want to know like how people butcher it. Like, I mean, it's fairly straightforward.
Well, it is. You must be acutely intelligent then, Brian.
Not really, but you know.
It's just hard G's, soft G's that can't pronounce the ending. It's a long and complex Greek name, right? So. Well,
you'll appreciate this. So, you know, we talk about names, and I always thought that my name was fairly straightforward, Brian Boyer. But you'll appreciate this being a resident of Montreal, Montreal, right, where they speak a lot of French. People have actually called me Brian Boyer, and I never understand. I never really understood that because it's fairly straightforward. I'm living in Connecticut, and so I'm not really sure why. I always thought Boyer was fairly straightforward, but clearly not. So I guess if people can't get Boyer right, clearly they're not getting Georgantis correctly either. Eye on Life podcast. Follow, like, share, and thanks for joining us this week. We have a very exciting show today. A fascinating show, and our first international guest, as a matter of fact. Valerie is, as I said, in Montreal and has lived in many places. Not that she's running from anyone or anything, but has lived in multiple places around the world. We're going to get to that in a second. Before we do, I want to get to a couple things. As many of you know who follow me on social media, I'm serious when I say this. We have a lot of humor on the show. We try to keep things light. But I am really excited from a business standpoint today to announce that we have our first sponsor for the Eye on Life podcast, and it's really humbling and exciting, and the opportunity. I don't take that kind of thing for granted. And the company who is sponsoring the show for at least the next 3 months is called Must NY. NY is in New York, and one of the co-owners happens to be a very, very old friend of mine. He's not old age-wise, but we've known each other since nursery school. He'll know this with a reference to the Little Red Schoolhouse that we used to go to when we were 3 years old. Chris Bossert and his lovely wife, Monica Perez Bossert, Must NY, which is located in Orchard Park, New York, just outside of Buffalo, which is actually very close to Canada. Not your part of Canada, Valerie, but close to the Canadian border there. I used to live out in the Buffalo area. And Chris and Monica are in the business of masks, the masks that people wear during the pandemic. And they also have other apparel and jewelry that they sell. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have – they're actually going to be on the show to talk about some of their products at some point. But for anybody who does not like to wear the masks, and I have to be honest with you, Valerie, I'm not saying this to sound mean. There are some people I'm actually glad they're wearing the mask, and it's not the way they look. Although I mentioned this on one of my other shows, I never realized how many people actually have nice eyes.
That's
there
really
are people out there that have most people, and I don't know if they're attractive or not. I don't really care. I care about the person inside, right? But it's amazing how many people I think have nice eyes. And the other thing too is that some people are very loud, like myself, and so the masks that people are wearing sort of stifle it a little bit, which is great. And the great thing about Must NY, and the website is mustny.com. So check out the website. The great thing about these masks is not only custom made for you and your interests. You can show your personality on these masks, but they're water repellent on the outside. So in the event that it's raining or somebody comes up to you and sneezes in your face, it repels that. And the inside is cotton, so you're not suffocating. So I want to thank Chris and Monica for being my first show sponsor. Anybody else who's interested in a show sponsor, eyeonlifepodcast.com, you can contact me directly. But Chris and Monica are taking the leap of faith, which I really, really appreciate. It's a great company. If you want to email them directly, it's must.newyork@gmail.com. And I want to thank them for the sponsorship. We'll get them plenty of plugs over the next 3 months. Do you wear your mask out in Montreal? Are people wearing their masks in Canada?
It's a very, very regimented process, and everyone has embraced it, adapted to it. myself, I'm floored at how desensitized I've become to seeing everyone wearing masks, including my daughter who goes onto the bus and she's wearing a mask, and I'm still, partly still shocked because it's just back to school. So I'm seeing the, just the regulations. And I mean, so yeah, no, we're all wearing masks. We're all safe distancing and social distancing. I'm actually having a birthday party for myself on Sunday, and I'm keeping down to the 10 adults. My dining room will be set up so we're all distant. It's really different measures, but I'm surprised pleasantly that of how diligent we generally have responded.
See, I've always respected the Canadian people, and it's for things like that. They adhere to the rules. The Americans don't always do that, but I will say Connecticut's been great. Connecticut, the rate's been low. The leadership here has been great.
Yeah.
And again, I know it's a business thing for Chris and Monica, but they're doing a great thing, obviously. And you could be the life of the party with some of the masks that they have. They may actually even be doing some Eye on Life podcast masks for me, which hopefully people won't use as a rag. They'll actually use it on their face. And I'll actually have some samples to show hopefully for the next show. So I want to get to it. It is go time here on the Eye on Life podcast. And I also want a special shout out. We have a few new listeners from the show this week from Florida, which I think I mentioned the last time, but a new Florida town, Boynton Beach, which is a great area down near Boca, Delray Beach. I think I mentioned in one of the other shows, we're getting a nice listenership down in Florida. Which if anybody ever wants to welcome me into their home, especially in February in Florida, I'm happy to come down there. I'll stay in a separate room with my masks from Must NY. And also, we have some listeners from Philadelphia that have joined us. And I really appreciate that because I always bash the Philadelphia Eagles football team. And so obviously anybody who listens from Philadelphia is probably an Eagles fan. So thank you for listening. Spread the word in Philly, the city of brotherly love. I appreciate that. And so why is Valerie on the show today, right? And Valerie has an incredible eclectic background that we are going to talk about today. And this is part one. This is part one of 2 episodes. So I'm really excited about that. If Valerie can tolerate me for 2 episodes, that's a good thing. And when Valerie and I were kind of talking about the topic of the show, which we'll get to in a second, it got me thinking, which as I said, I do that every week. I think about kind of how I want to open the show. And I was thinking about change. And just in general, right? Now, there are certain kind of changes, right? You might change minor things in your life, maybe a brand of chips or toilet paper right? You might change that. You might change, there are a lot of things in life that you change, jobs, cities, relationships, all that kind of thing, right? And we've talked a little bit about this in the past with change. And I realized that on one hand, I'm okay with change. Professionally, I'm okay with change. I've been involved with a lot of organizations that have gone through organizational change. I love that. I love the challenge. I think that you can't grow if you don't change professionally, right? I've switched jobs, and I don't really get sad when I leave. I'm excited for the next opportunity, right? You miss people. But Valerie, I realized that I don't love personal change. And I'm going through a lot of personal change right now in life, my personal life, which I won't get into right now, maybe at another time. And I have to say, the challenge has been a challenge psychologically for me. I realize that I don't love the personal change, and I'm trying to figure out how I can translate the embracing of professional change into my personal life. And as somebody, and we're going to get into this in just a second, but as somebody who has been a lot of places, has faced a lot of change in your life, and we're going to introduce you in a second here. Any suggestions for anyone who's bad with change? Because I know it is uncomfortable, but it is also necessary. So what's your thought about change? Are you okay with it? Do you struggle with it? I struggle with it personally, but I'm okay with it professionally. Is that normal? Tell me, am I losing my mind?
No, I think with any given change, there's obviously less of an emotional attachment to professional change, right? I mean, we're intellectually stimulated, and personal change is obviously far more difficult to embrace. It's not embraceable, and I really think that it's something that you've got to really walk over the hot coals of discomfort. Until you get to a place where you're allowing more or expanding to tolerate it. And I think that's how I would describe. There's clearly a period of discomfort. There's no question about that.
Have you ever walked on hot coals? I feel like maybe you have since you've been to so many places. Is that something that you've ever done?
I've not walked over hot coals, no.
Would you? Would you do that?
If someone were to pay me a lot of money, yes.
Okay, I'd like to know what your threshold is on that. But that's a good analogy, and it's good symbolism almost, because life is oftentimes like walking on hot coals. Sometimes mind over matter, that kind of thing. And so you're listening to the Eye on Life podcast. Again, please, share, like, follow us. We want to get out to the masses here. We're a podcast for the people. We talk about daily life. We talk about topics that you would talk about in a bar or a tavern or a pub. I have to say all those terms because you've been into so many places, Valerie. I don't know what they call those establishments and all the places that you've been to, but let's get to know you for a little bit. And people may be wondering, okay, Valerie Georgantis, she's from Montreal. So our first international, wait a second, I want to make sure I'm clear of this. Yes, you are our first international guest. We do have several international listeners, which is great. And I'm really appreciative. And I have to say, I love Montreal. Montreal, where you live right now, is one of my favorite cities. I grew up in upstate New York, which is really only a few hours from Montreal. And I think it was actually my first international city where I traveled with my parents. And always impressed with not just Montreal, but I always found the Canadian cities to be very, very clean, relatively safe, a lot of culture, a lot of diversity. I was always very, very impressed by that. So I love Montreal. Always been one of my favorite cities, even though I don't speak French. On a good day, I speak English well. But let's get to know you. Let's get to know you. Tell us a little bit about your background. You're on the show because you have this incredible background that people are going to leave here fascinated with. And I want to know a little bit about you and kind of what are you doing right now, where you're at, and then we'll get into kind of how you've gotten to where you're sitting right now with that lovely artwork in the back.
Oh, thank you.
In fact, if you're only listening, and you want to jump onto YouTube, because the show is also video on YouTube, Valerie's got a really nice, you can't really see it too well, but there's some nice colors behind her. She has a great background here, much nicer than mine, clearly, which has nothing yet. But give us a little bit about your background. What are you doing for a living right now? I think I know that, but you tell us a little bit. And what's happening with you in Montreal these days?
So first and foremost, I'd like to point out that this artwork is painted by a Montreal artist who's a personal friend of mine, and his name is Dwayne Drover. So these are original oil on canvas, and he's phenomenal. So beautiful. Dwayne Drover, if anyone is interested in looking him up. So what am I doing? I'm back where I started. It's almost like The Alchemist. I went around the world. I traveled. I saw. I conquered, and I'm back to my original roots and came back a few years ago. And really what prompted my return was more family reasons. My daughter being close to family, and my dad had an illness and is deceased now. So it was life shifted and the priorities shifted, but I'm definitely most certainly in a privileged position where I can work from home. I've been doing it for decades. Not that I want to date myself. But I've been doing it for a long time, so it didn't really matter whether I, worked out of my home office or worked in an actual office building. My prospects and clients are all over the place and all over the world.
So I opened up the show talking about change, and I have to be absolutely brutally honest. One of the things, because we talk about personal change kind of sometimes being a challenge for me, and I absolutely despise moving. I would actually rather walk on the hot coals that we talked about earlier than move. I hate it. I'm not the most organized person in the world. I have a lot of, I'm not so much of a pack rat, but I do have some clutter. I do have a tough time getting rid of things. And so for me, moving, anytime I've ever moved, which I've moved a decent amount of times in life, has been an absolute nightmare. And here you are, because, we're talking about kind of the full circle you've gone in. I want to we're going to take kind of half the circle today, and then the next show we'll take the second half.
Sure.
But you have moved around a lot. And I want to ask you why. And you talked about some personal reasons and everything, but there's got to be more of a reason why you moved around. And I'm curious to know why you've moved around. And then let's talk about maybe some of the places that you've decided to move to.
Sure. I mean, with some of the moves, some were brought on by me, as I wanted to work in a different market, and some were forced. So for instance, my first move was when I was a little girl. I was the age of 5, and when my parents met and married in Montreal, they made a decision that they would be moving back to Greece. So I'm first generation Greek. My parents were immigrant parents, and they sent me for a couple of months to live with my grandmother and on my dad's side of the family, and start the school year started. So I was going into kindergarten. A few months went into several years, and there was a change in military culture where men had to serve military time for 24 months. And my dad didn't want to be away from my mom for such a long period of time. There was a law that you could pay X amount of money if you had moved away from Greece for X amount of years. But then that law changed as soon as basically all our stuff had been delivered to Greece. And then my mom and I moved back, and their dream didn't come true, but it did. Now, in Montreal, they built incredible memories together. So that was my first move. So what was interesting about it is that so Greek was my official first language. We spoke Greek in the household. And then when I lived in Greece, I forgot all my English, which was fascinating.
Does it take long to do that? Because I even know, like, even in the United States, right? If you're from, like, say, a place like, I'll say New York. I'm from upstate New York, but even people like down in like Long Island, right? For example, they have the accent, and sometimes it gets watered down a little when they move someplace else. But does that take a long time to lose the language? I mean, even the dialects, even here, I feel like sometimes if you've been living in a place for a long time, you kind of lose it a little bit. How long did it take you to lose your English? Because that's frightening for me to even think about that.
It's very frightening, and I didn't know I had lost it because right. I was a kid, so I defined myself based on my surroundings, and everyone else spoke Greek. But what was interesting as well is that the curriculum was so advanced that what I was doing in grade 1, I started doing in grade 7 when I was in Canada, like in terms of mathematics and different types of sciences and history. I mean, so really, really advanced learning curriculum. But how long did it take? I really don't know. What I do know is that as soon as I came back, I was going back to elementary school and I couldn't speak a word of English. And the teacher had to do some sign language initially. And my dad, who spoke broken English at the time, taught me how to read and how to speak English again. And that took no time, because when you've been, for me, having been trained to speak different languages, understand them, think separately in those languages, it's easy to relearn another language, or relearn it in the case of English, or learn a new one for that matter.
And when we had this conversation about a week or two ago, and you speak how many languages now?
So I'm officially trilingual, and but I would say that I definitely have a multilingual platform.
And you speak, and just to clarify, which languages do you speak fluently right now?
The very obvious English. Greek, and French. And spoken Italian, but I actually understand the Spanish and Italian. I really understand. I simply can't speak in an advanced manner, but I can certainly comprehend quite a bit.
Now, Montreal is a very international city, so I imagine that you're able to maybe use all three in Montreal.
Yes.
So let me ask you this question: How do you go from language to language, or do you have to do that? I think that's really interesting because. Again, you go to Montreal, and people from all over the world live in Montreal, and I know it's very French, and there are parts of Montreal you go to. I know, like Old Montreal, and you're hearing more French than you are English. So how is that a hard transition to make? Is that you go from, okay, in this store I'm talking French to someone, in that store maybe I'm going to speak English, and then later on I'm with my family talking Greek. Can that happen in one day for you? And is that a hard transition to make?
It happens within minutes.
But you're able to make the adjustment.
The phone rings and my mom calls,
right.
And because I'm able to think in different languages. So I love when I get angry, I think in Greek, because cursing in Greek is really fulfilling.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question. And you said this the other day too, which I found intriguing, and you just said it again. You said you think in different languages. So if you are working and you're having a thought, you might think in a certain language. If you're angry, you said you might think in Greek. Explain that to me. Again, as someone who, I took Spanish for several years in high school. I wish I'd like to go back and actually relearn it, because I really did love it. And at the time I was just too immature to try to learn a new language. I would love to do that now. Hopefully I've matured a little bit since 12th grade. But, I'm wondering, how does that work in your brain when you're thinking in one language and then transitioning into, again, there's that transition. I find that very odd. How does that work?
It must sound odd, but I think when you've been programmed, in that as a tiny little kid, as a baby toddler kid, it's just ingrained in you. Like those neural pathways have been developed. So if I'm walking into a French store, I immediately it's like a switch. I simply flip it and I'm speaking in French. Same with the other languages, and I could just go back and forth. And what's really interesting is for someone else who's non-Greek, who hears me speak Greek, sometimes I have a hard time locating a word, so I'll just say it in English. to every immigrant family, that is a normal thing. Everyone else outside of that, is surprised or entertained, I would say.
Are most of the people that you associate with, either through work, family, friends, are most of them also multilingual, or are you the party favor? So we're at a party. Oh, let's get her to speak Greek tonight, or let's get her to curse in Greek, or let's see how her English is after a couple drinks. Are you around people that are also as culturally diverse and adept at speaking in many languages as you are, or is that unique?
Having left Canada, I came to realize that it was very, very unique. Being in Canada, we're just a very culturally diverse and respectful country. I mean, we're a bilingual country. English and French, signs are bilingual. Quebec, the province of Quebec, or Montreal is the principal city, is far more aggressive about speaking French. And there was some just political history, if you care for me to walk you through some of that, maybe just a minute, and I don't want to focus on that. But it was essentially, French is the #1 language here, is the leading language.
Well, let's go into that briefly. We won't go into too much history because we do have a lot to cover, but do talk about that, because, and I was actually going to ask you if it's accepted in a place like Montreal and maybe other places that you've been, to be multilingual. Is that, like, I look at it and say, like, that's really impressive. And I think it's amazing. And to have that diversity and to be able to communicate with people in different cultures. Others might say, more conservative viewpoints might be like, speak my language or don't speak at all. And it sounds like maybe, because the thing that I always find really interesting, and United States and America, amazing country, right? I've never lived anywhere else. I never will live anywhere else, I don't think, unless maybe, someday somewhere warm on an island somewhere. Great country. But I do always find it very interesting that when you go to another country, and I'm not this huge world traveler, but when you go to another country, the people do speak, for the most part, speak English. But when you come here at a hotel or something like that, a lot of people only speak English. So I'm curious, when you talk about the Quebec situation, and I know Quebec City, for example, I know it's pretty much all French there, right? But it sounds like it's frowned upon if you're speaking anything but French. And I guess my question would be, is that true? And why is that? There's got to be some politics behind that.
It used to be very, very frowned upon. But those times have relaxed since. So the French have become more anglicized, the English have become more accepting and francophonized. So those two worlds have somewhat blended into as harmonious as a community can be. But it wasn't that way. In the early 60s, there was a radical movement that was basically based on Marxist and Leninist principles. And it was called the acronym in French is FLQ, but it stands for, and I wrote it down here, I had to write it in English, the Quebec Liberation Front. And it started a whole sovereignty union or disunion for that matter topic, but this particular radical movement was quite severe. There were bombings, there were kidnappings, bombing places of worship, key buildings, the Montreal Stock Exchange, and at the time it was our Prime Minister was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau's dad. He basically brought martial law, but since that movement hasn't really, it took new life throughout the decades. So there were several referendums, basically people voting to separate from the rest of Canada or not, and that. I left during a very critical one, and there was a mass exodus out of Montreal for primarily more immigrants and English-speaking, or more dominantly English-speaking people. I left in the mid-90s and moved to Toronto. And that was the reason for it. It was quite extreme. I mean, when I started working, I had to absolutely speak French. I had to do my presentations in French, and you just learn that business acumen that didn't come naturally for me. Obviously, not even in English when you start off your career, right? You're learning the acumen, it was. A very, very close-knit tie between, like, it was less than 1 percentage point of separation versus not. And I was young at the time, and I felt I didn't want anyone dictating what my life would look like. And I wanted to be free to make my own choices and not to only speak French. The government had people who were tasked with going to front storefronts and measuring the French sign, because it had to be a percentage, don't know what the percentage point was, but basically 3 times larger than the English signs, or that storefront would be fined. So
that's pretty extreme.
It's pretty extreme.
And has that has settled down now? That is
yes, that's settled down. That's settled down. It's a very vibrant city. It's a small city. Certainly not as big as Toronto. Toronto's a very commerce-oriented city. Montreal's a lot more cultural, but we also have a tremendous talent pool here. When I was growing up, we were ostracized because we weren't French. So if you could look at this and think that I'm actually an ethnic minority in this community, no one would believe me, but that was the case. So we had to work harder, learn faster, be better, be sharper to get anywhere. And so those skills translated to wherever I brought them. I always aimed higher, better. It was something that, again, was also programmed into the lifestyle here.
So you're listening to the Eye on Life podcast. We're talking with Valerie Georgantis, who has lived a very extensive life in many different places, currently in Montreal. And I want to go back to something that you said before. And also, again, just a shout out to MustNY, mustny.com. If you need a mask, check it out. We all need masks these days, no matter where you're at. And I want to ask you, you said you were 5 years old when your family moved you from Montreal to Greece.
Yes. Okay.
So if I was 5 years, when I was 5 years old, if my parents had moved me across the street, that would have been a big change for me. And you're telling me that it's basically you're moving overseas, and you're moving cultures, and you're moving languages and schools. So how was that? What do you remember about that when you were 5 years old? And how is that kind of at that early age you're shaped? You start to become shaped at that age. And it sounds like maybe that helped you later on in life, maybe adjusting and having some of the experiences that you've had culturally, ethnically, and whatnot. But as a 5-year-old, what was going through your head when you're making this move from, and 5 years old, you may not have been that attached to Montreal at the time. You might not have even realized it. But do you remember what you were thinking as your parents were making that move?
I remember it very, very vividly. We lived in an apartment. I was going down the stairs saying goodbye to everything. I was excited. I was going to go on an airplane. I was going to go visit my grandma, who I adored, and I've been named after her. My Greek name is not Valerie, it's Vasiliki, or Vasiliki, or as the kids used to call me in school, Vaseline. And so
that's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
I've heard much worse. They were jealous. They were jealous of the
Yes,
name. That's why.
yes, they were. Well, if they knew the derivative, it actually means royalty.
Well, there you go. They were smart kids. They knew that, and so they were giving you a hard time for it.
Not so royal in this life, maybe in a past one. But no, I was extremely excited, and my parents had coordinated another couple that they knew, and they were going to Greece, so I traveled with them, and they were the guardians when I was met on the other side from family members. The change hit me afterwards, where the novelty of, okay, I went on the plane, I saw the ocean, living here with all these gorgeous animals and all this is fun. Now, where are my parents?
Right.
So that's where it had, there was a dip in that. But I would have to say, Brian, if you were to ask me, the favorite place I've lived and loved, I would have to say it's Greece, hands down. Hands down.
So tell us a little bit why. I love to know a little bit more about Greece because, as we said earlier, even when you move places domestically, right? I mean, even moving from, about 17, 18 years ago, I moved from Washington, D.C. up to Connecticut. And that's a huge culture change. Mm-hmm. So you're moving from Montreal to Greece, which is, 100 times more than that. So what was it about Greece? I've heard great things about Greece. I've never been. So I don't know a ton about it. Other than that, it's a beautiful country with beautiful people, from what I've been told. And I don't mean physically. I'm just saying the people that I've heard are amazing. And clearly, you validate that point. You validate the beauty of the Greek people with your with kind of what you've experienced and everything, and how well traveled you are. But what was it about Greece that was so enticing to you? And if you loved it so much, I guess my question is, why are we talking to you from Montreal, not Greece?
Well, I'd like to change that over the next decade and transition there. So if I have a dream, it would be to spend the remaining, however many years I have. Hopefully it'll be 40. Good.
You're young. You have a ways to go.
Yeah. It's simply, my heart is there. I mean, that's really the most genuine way I can answer that question, and truthful way. It's magical, from everything from the scenery, the waters, the food, the people are incredibly hospitable. I mean, I have a lot of family there. Life was just different. Like, for instance, our family has olive orchards. So we actually have olive oil produced, and it gets shipped to us here, which is amazing. But wow. It's for personal use. So we still, even though my dad passed, it's still active. So we have people who are producing olive oil, and I just remember the sights, the smells, the what I heard. Everything was just beautiful, and Greek people, by the way, are also very beautiful. not just on the inside and their general hospitality. There's nothing about Greece I don't love, other than their politics. But we won't talk about that.
We'll save that for another time. But
yeah.
But I always wonder, and I want to talk to you about stereotypes a little bit here. And again, I'm glad we're doing the two parts here. You're listening to part one with Valerie Georgantis. I'm really happy that we decided to do two parts here, because I'm not even getting close to covering everything I want to cover with you. But I do want to talk about stereotypes, and not necessarily all not all stereotypes are bad, but nonetheless, stereotypes can be dangerous and that kind of thing. But I always feel like there's a portrayal of Greek people that's very, again, kind of what you're saying, a little bit, that joyous and festive and family oriented. Maybe that's not a stereotype. That might be less of a stereotype, more of a cultural thing. There's a distinction there, obviously. But when you see on TV, and there's that, what was that movie, my Big Fat Greek Wedding, right?
That was my family. It was my family.
Right. So was that so? For example, anybody who's seen that movie, which was very popular, is that an accurate portrayal of the Greek people?
So slightly exaggerated, obviously,
of course,
but most certainly, yes. And I do have an aunt who is as dramatic as I forget her name, Andrea. I forget her name, but the aunt. So I have an aunt like that, and her name is Tula.
Tula, okay.
Tula.
but it does, again, it does seem like a happy place, and the temperature over there, it's pretty temperate, right? Isn't it pretty?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's very dry.
Right.
So
like all year.
The temperature, no, I mean, there's natural, there are 4 seasons.
Okay.
Obviously, you know, in the sort of the mountainous areas, there's snow. Like Mount Olympus, for instance, but no, the weather is beautiful. Summer, the middle of summer is way too hot even for me. I mean, it just gets really, really hot. But other than that, it's all around, you know, just a stunning country lifestyle-wise, because everyone is so festive, and you feel different there because of that festivity and that. You just want to be festive, and it's almost addictive, I would have to say. What's also very beautiful is just the history and the depth of history. And, you know, people talk about, oh, you Greeks think you've invented everything. Well, we kind of did. History, philosophy, mathematics, astrology, astronomy, you know.
I'm not thanking you for mathematics. Okay, that's that was always my worst subject. You guys could have simplified it a little bit for someone. But that is because the Greek philosopher, right? The philosophers and all that, which is just a more addition, more enriching of that culture, because you do hear about that. But I do have to ask you about. And because this is an Eye on Life podcast, we talk about culture and diversity in life. What are the drinks of choice and the food of choice? I know Greek food. I've had some Greek food, and I don't know if that's Americanized or not. What people seem to like over here, but when you're over there, let's say I'm going over there, right? I'm taking a flight over. I'm not going anywhere without my must NY mask, right? But I'm really not traveling anywhere right now, overseas or anywhere. But if I'm heading over there, and I'm going to spend a week there, what's my first meal? What am I eating, and what am I eating, and what am I drinking for that first meal? Let's say it's dinner.
Moussaka is a favorite one, but the beauty of just the various areas and clusters of Greece is that every local area, like the islands, and certain types of islands have, you know, different types of specialties. So everywhere you go, there's that sort of local specialties that are available. So very, very vast and pure, just from even the way that they process food is, I mean, it's so pure, you really taste it. There's no hormones, there's no injections, there's no antibiotics. Everything is about respect for the animal. So lots of fish. We're fish eaters, but meat eaters as well. So, but I would say, like, you know, when you talk about what meal you would have, what was really funny and how I relate to my big fat Greek wedding is, and relate to this point very, very well, when she went to school, she was the only kid with the big fat glasses and not the ham and cheese sandwich, because I never had the ham and cheese sandwich that everyone else had. I had the moussaka or the pasticcio or the, you know, stuffed vine leaves that had special instructions to store them. So I was the kid with all these, you know, peculiar meals.
Were you trading any of the moussaka for a chocolate chip cookie or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Probably not.
I wanted to be like the other kids. I wanted to have a sandwich.
Right. I think I like the idea of the fancy lunch. I think that sounds
delicious. Absolutely.
I would have become your friend very quickly. So you spent how many years in Greece? You were there for how long?
Well, I did some elementary years in Greece when I was a kid, and then I went back and I spent summers throughout my teenage years. I went back and forth. I got my first job in Greece. I was 15. I was so mature. And it was for a high-end boutique in Corinth, and Corinth is about an hour away from Athens, an hour drive. The store was a chain. They absolutely loved my work ethic. I mean, at the age of 15, this is where, you know, the privilege of having worked in or raised by high integrity, you know, people, I learned a really, really good, strong work ethic, and they were floored by it because the Greeks are saying, we like to be a little lazy.
Right. Well, it's probably because it's more of a relaxed. It sounds like it's more of a relaxed culture. Is it one of those? Because I know when they talk about Europe, and they talk about people are in the cafes and in the bars. It's 3:00. They're taking a 3-hour, 4-hour lunch. Is that the way it is in Greece too? Because yes. I could get used to that very easily.
Yes, and what you would love about it is the amounts of debates that you would have with people, and it doesn't matter what it is. Greeks love to debate, and if you randomly pick 10 different Greek people on one topic, you are going to get such an invariably different story and reasonings within all those 10 people, and go, wow, that every one of those arguments makes sense based on how they supported the argument, and then you don't know what to choose, so you've got to be the 11th person who has your own formulated opinion.
Are the Greeks? And we talked about this on our last show, because we talked about the idea of arguments versus discussions, and we all know those people who are very argumentative. They want to. It's not necessarily about the discussion. It's about being right. But from a Greek culture standpoint, are they trying to be right, or are they just having a really good, fun, intellectual, stimulating conversation?
Well, I mean, it's people who want to be right are cross-cultural. Yeah. So
that's the universal language.
Yeah.
Stubbornness.
So yeah. Exactly. So, but it's more, we love to be heard. We're very passionate about our opinions, certainly very passionate about politics, and, but they love to debate and just talk about things. It's stimulating. And it's really wonderful to watch. I mean, if I go, in cafes in Greek are called kafenia. So you can walk in there and see, sit next to a table of 10 men and just listen to them talk. That is one entertaining afternoon, and a rich one, a very rich one.
And are they wine drinkers? Are they drinking wine, coffee? What are they drinking over there?
Wine, coffee. Ouzo is, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's made by the anise seed. So I particularly never acquired the taste for ouzo. Right. But it basically everything.
So we're going to start to wrap up here, because we've been talking for a while. We've talked about your transition as a 5-year-old from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, to Greece. Mm-hmm. And in the next show, in the next segment, we're going to get a little bit into kind of your transition back to Montreal, and a little bit about your work life as well. I want to talk about your work, and might even get a little personal, not too personal, but to kind of tease the next show a little bit. And you went from Greece back to Montreal, or you lived anywhere, or did you live somewhere else before you kind of settled back in Montreal? Just to kind of set the stage.
Yeah, I lived in Montreal up until I left when I was in my 20s. So we returned back with my parents, and after I returned, then my brother was born and my sister was born. So So and then I left for the obvious reasons of it was a far more lucrative market to move to Toronto. And if you know anything about Toronto, it's a very, very commerce-oriented city, also extremely culturally diverse, but very different commerce pace, and just lucrative from every aspect.
So go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's got the New York vibe. New York will never be superseded, but it's got a comparable vibe, I would have to say.
So I want to talk to you about that the next time, because we talked about the Canadian cities earlier, and I've been to a few, and I'm curious to know kind of what your thoughts are being Canadian, what the differences are between those cities. We're going to talk about that next time. We're going to talk a little bit more about your nomad life. We use that word nomad. You are a bit of a nomad, so we are going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about a little bit more about culture, society, and diversity in the next show with you, because I think that one of the interesting things about living in different places is that you do sort of see the world, I think, from maybe a slightly different viewpoint, a different lens, mm-hmm. than maybe somebody who lives in the same town their entire life, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm curious to see some of the other question I want to ask you in the next show are some of the perceptions that I'm going to say you guys, the Canadians, have about America these days. I'm curious to find out a little. I'm giving you time to prepare your answer.
Oh God! It sounds like I need to prepare for this one.
You're going to need to
prepare anything today other than bringing myself and what I know.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next show. So that's kind of our tease for the next show. So diversity, culture, Canadian life compared to American life. And also the other thing I want to cover in the next show is there's always been a little bit of a stereotype here in the United States about Canadians. You kind of hear those jokes and things like that. I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to know if it's legit, or I want to know if we're being jerks here. And I want to know what some of the stereotypes you guys have about Americans. So that's going to happen on the next show. We talked a lot about the culture today and your background. That was fun. But we're going to get a little bit edgy next time, maybe a little bit. So I'm giving you time to prepare for that.
Sure.
So Valerie,
and in my culture, having been raised Greek, we say we're Greek first. So I'm Greek Canadian. I don't just say I'm Canadian. I'm Greek Canadian.
Greek Canadian. Okay.
Greek Canadian. I
like that. So again, I like that because it's very diverse, and so a lot of societal pieces coming in part 2. So you've listened to part 1 with Valerie Georgantis, part 2 coming up on the next episode of the Eye on Life podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and again, mustny.com to get your customized mask from Chris Bossert and his lovely wife Monica. And in the meantime, Valerie, I hope that you will do your part and everybody else will do their part between now and next week in keeping their eye on life. Thanks so much for joining us, Valerie. We will see you next week.
Thank you very much for having me, Brian, and congratulations on your sponsor. And I will be going and getting a box of their masks. They sound fascinating and fabulous.
And not only are they a great business, but they're great people. And thank you for tolerating me for part 2 next week.
No worries. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.